with people talking right now. Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Nierenberg, the Executive Director here at Center for the Arts Evergreen. We're so excited about tonight. Before we get started, I want to say some thank yous. First to my amazing staff. This is Sarah Miller, my co-pilot and Senior Director of Exhibitions and Education. We have Amanda Ingalls, who is our Director of Marketing and Sponsorships. And so if you want to spend any money with us, just go to Amanda. We have, where is Lainey, our newest addition? Lainey, this is our newest addition. So Lainey started with us last week, and she's our new events manager. And we just kind of threw right into the throes. So we're super excited. Okay, we're super excited. And I want to thank my sponsors, Alexa Cowie for Network and Alexa Interiors, and as her second client ever, I can attest that she has beautiful stuff in her store and she has amazing taste. And I also want to thank Karen Weidner, who is with Caldwell Bankers. She couldn't be here tonight, but she is also supporting us. So thank you. We are a nonprofit and could not do this without the support of our sponsors. So thank you, thank you. So if you guys are not in awe about this show, it is so beautiful. I have told both of these artists, I want multiple pieces from each of them. So we are going to have some fun tonight. We are going to do a Q&A. This is Helen Rudy here, who is the beautiful fused glass artist, and that is Dr. Danny Williams over there, who does these beautiful monochromatic 2D oil paintings. I'm going to hand the mic over to Sarah and let you, she's going to tell you a little bit about them before we start our Q&A. Thank you very much. I forgot to say thank you to Tom. Tom Maxey. Thank you. It's all in tow of what we do, and it's like the dad. We're like, can you use the credit card today? So sorry, Tom. I did not forget you. I just forgot the moment. And here's Sarah. Thank you. And we want to say hi to people on Zoom too. We have Zoom going. We have, it looks like, I think we have 15 on Zoom as well. So thank you guys for coming out tonight. We didn't know it was going to snow, and we live in Evergreen, and we brave all sorts of weather, but we really appreciate you being here. If you have a chance to pick up a catalog, you will see the story of this exhibition and how it came to be. But I encourage you to read that from Lisa's perspective and from my perspective. The long and the short of it is, Lisa and I went down to Denver one day on an artist scouting trip, and we were invited by one of our artist members who has a studio space at Prism's workspace to tour Prisms, and they are individual artist studios there that artists rent, and they have large and smaller. And we passed by a window, and I saw Helen Rudy's piece that is out in the lobby on the pedestal called Jean Davis. And Lisa and I just stopped in our tracks. It was the way Helen uses glass. I had never seen a fused glass artist who was working in these drop vessels like she does. And that's not to take away from all of the beauty of her other pieces as well, but these drop vessels that you see along the edges and out in the lobby were really what made us stop and go, oh my gosh, the color is phenomenal. Helen will talk to you a little bit about her sandblasting technique, where we're all so used to seeing glass that is a shiny finish, and she sandblasts some of it to achieve that matte finish, which makes it really just sort of glow from within. So the same day we met Helen, she gave us a tour of her studio. We felt even more in love with each piece that we saw. The same day, we went over to Walker Fine Art. Bobby Walker's here tonight. We want to say hello to her as well. And while we said that we're touring Bobby's gallery, they have a different exhibition. And Danny's work was not part of the current exhibition that was up at Walker Fine Art. But Bobby is brilliant in the way she stages her gallery. You experienced the exhibition, 4 or 5 of her current artists, and then she always has individual pieces hanging from the rest of the artists that she represents. So Lisa and I actually locked ourselves in the back room. We went out the back door and accidentally locked ourselves out of the gallery. But while we were back there, Lisa grabbed my arm, and this piece, this blue piece on this wall next to you is called Lapis. And that piece was hanging back in the back by the rear exit there. And she said, I have to have that in my living room right now. And we moved and we turned, and neither one of us had ever seen an oil painter with this type of mark making technique that can take a monochromatic 2D experience and make you feel as though you're stepping into the canvas. And Danny's use of technique and brushstroke and movement within his paintings were really what drew us to him. We walked out that day of Bobby Walker's gallery, Walker Fine Art, went to lunch around the corner, and Lisa and I said, we've got to put these two together. And that was how Saturation was born. And we wanted to invite both Helen and Danny to answer some questions tonight about themselves. As we have gotten to know them, it's been such a gift to not only fall in love with their art, but them as people. We were going to ask you guys some questions about where you came from, where you've traveled, the similarities in the two of them, although they are so different, there are so much overlap in their lives and their travel. So Helen, I'd love for you to start and just tell us a little bit. People are going to notice Helen has an accent. Neither of these two individuals were born in the US, but just give us a little bit of your story about how you came to art in your life.
So as you can tell, I'm not from around here. I moved here from the UK 2001. I was actually born in Liberia, West Africa. Moved back to the UK when I was 8. Met my husband whilst I was cycling across Tanzania. We were doing a reconnaissance trip for an adventure travel company, and we were sort of classically called as guinea pigs. So there was a route that had been done on a mountain on a dirt bike, and they put 6 cyclists together to see if you could actually do it on mountain bikes. So hence we were the guinea pigs. Doing this route for, I think it's 11 days across Tanzania, across the Rift Valley and around, and that's where I met my husband over there in the seat you pointed at. And then, so I'm still trying to figure out if we're in love. He figures out, he says that he realized within about 2 weeks. I'm sort of, being the typical British reserved person here. We'll think about it. But anyway, so we did the cross the pond thing, and I moved to Vale in 2001. That's where we were living. I worked in the UK as a real estate manager for Whitbread, a big brewing company, and then when I moved here, I was a construction manager for Vale Resorts. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in land economics, so nothing to do with art whatsoever. So anyway, I move over here, and I struggled with the winter evenings. You sort of tend to hibernate, I felt, up there, and a lot of our friends were in the hospitality businesses, so we didn't see or do an awful lot of socializing in the evenings. I did a stained glass class for a weekend and did not like that whatsoever. So a friend of mine had a kiln in her garage, and she did kiln fused glass and stained glass. So she said, why don't you come up and, in the evenings, and we'll dabble in the garage and, see if you like that. So I started playing around in Carol's garage on fused glass, and I became completely hooked by the process and what went into making the pieces of glass, and how you could sort of form a piece of glass and take it from one dimension into another and then create the shapes. So the habit was an expensive habit. The glass medium is not a cheap medium to use, and so I'd keep making these pieces, and the house slowly started to fill up with more and more pieces, and I'd give them away, but I still had to feed the habit. And then I had some pieces in a local coffee shop down in Eagle, and they were all functional pieces back in the day, because this was probably, 15 years ago now. So they were in the coffee shop, and the manager of Pismo Bees at Beaver Creek lived down there at the time, Nicole. And she came in and saw them and gave me a call and said, hey, we'd like to have your pieces in Beaver Creek. And at that time, I was doing a lot of bowls and platters, coasters, small pieces, because I only had a small kiln at the time. But Pismo picked those pieces up in Beaver Creek. And then Sandy said, oh, well, let's get these into Denver. And then Sandy goes to Ava in Vail. Ava, you need to have these pieces in Vail also. And then, of course, it came into Aspen. So all of a sudden, I was in all of the pismos, and then it allowed me to get more and more adventurous. So hence, over the years, it's sort of metamorphosed into where I am now. An awful lot of experimentation, completely self-taught. Usually, pieces will start out small, and they may always end up in the bin because I don't like how they replicate and get bigger. But it's been a sort of a moving process into more sculptural pieces that we see now. So here I am, full-time. When we moved to Denver, 2007, I started working full-time in glass. That's how you see me today.
And we are so lucky that you have your career, because it is beautiful. And Danny, so, you know, Sarah was right, we saw your piece back there, and I was like that child that wanted to touch it and knew them. Because I wanted to, you know, there's so much texture in there, I just wanted to feel how you did. I didn't, but I wanted to. But Danny, who is Dr. Danny Williams, let me introduce him as that. Why don't you tell how your journey came to painting?
Okay, how much time do you have? Before I get started with my story, I'd like to extend my thanks and gratitude for all the ladies. The three here, Sarah, Lisa, and Helen, who I've only known since September, but I feel like I've known her my entire life because we have such similar experiences. I'd like to thank Bobby, my gallery owner, and my wife in the back, Diane, who's my best spokesman. So I just want to say thank you. And the reason I want to say thank you is because these ladies are just exceptional, and they have been just a joy to work with throughout the entire process. And I'm just lucky to be here. Okay, I can pass this. My story is a bit convoluted, kind of like Helen's. My father was in the military, the Army, and as a young man in the service, he had the opportunity to go to France when they still had American bases on the French mainland. And he met my mother there, who was French. As a consequence of that, I was born in France in a military hospital. We stayed there up until I was about 4 years old. So my beginning was at least enveloped with culture. If you think of France, they have a thing about the food, they have a thing about the art, they have a thing about fashion, maybe not as much as the Italians, but the whole essence of being French is enveloped in culture. And so I had that as a background, because I think it helps shape how you look at things. The other thing about that experience was that my maternal side, starting with my great-grandfather, even though he was not an artist, he could draw. And it's obvious when you look at his school books that I have, he has drawings of, you would think that Raphael or somebody like that, or Michelangelo had made those sketches. And these were sketches that he had made when he was 13 years old in school. And whatever that genetic ability was that he had was passed down to my mother and to me. So I started out early just being able to draw. And I love to draw. And that's been kind of persistent throughout my entire life. Along with that, we moved to Memphis, Tennessee, because my dad was originally from Mississippi, and the compromise between France and Mississippi apparently was Memphis, which was not a bad deal. You know, the food is exceptional, and there was a degree of culture there. And in my interest in growing up in Memphis, I developed an interest in science. I developed an interest in nature. I continued with my art just on my own. And this was pervasive throughout my life and still is. And in school, I went to graduate school. I majored in biology. I have a graduate degree in cell biology. And all through this, with my experience, especially in graduate school, I was drawing well enough to be paid by researchers at St. Jude Children's Hospital for making drawings for their slides and also being published in some of their textbooks. So even though I didn't really have formal art training, I was actually making money being an artist at that point. That continued on through medical school, which I did endure as well. And I would, again, part-time freelance doing science or medical illustrations. And I continued that even through my training as a physician. And so that's where my art background is. I've always had kind of an ability. I was able to put it to good use, particularly to generate funds for graduate school and medical school. And I've continued to do so. And every once in a while, I'll do an illustration for medical text or things of that nature. Also, while I was in college, I did take a course in art history because I wanted background in art history. I did an oil painting class just for fun, but I was already painting in oils before then, just on my own. And I think the reason I went to an oil painting class, aside from all the science classes I was taking, was so I could meet girls. So I don't know how much art I learned in the oil painting class, but it was good. I met my wife, and we had our respective occupations. I was a rheumatologist. I did training in rheumatology, which is arthritis and autoimmune diseases. So I subspecialized in that. I trained in Vancouver, so we lived in Vancouver a couple of years in Canada. I came back and moved to Denver. And subsequent to that, we saved our money and decided that we liked to travel. So we actually quit our respective jobs after about 6 years of being in Denver and saved our funds, and we went traveling. And our initial travel plans were for a year. And what ended up happening is we ended up being 2 years. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because there's a similarity with Helen's experience in her travels and with mine. But also during this, I was able to, with my wife, to see some of the best art the world has to offer. And the thing about it is, if you attend enough museums and you see enough works of art, you can start to hone in on what really is significant or what really is good, because it's being presented to you. Obviously, if there are national museums and they're showing art, it's probably the best that they have. And so that kind of helped broaden my eye and my art input to some degree. While we were traveling, I decided, well, maybe I should, since I have the opportunity to think clearly, because of not having any other obligations or anything, maybe I should start, painting seriously. And when we came back to Denver, I started painting landscapes, realistic landscapes. You'd never expect that looking at what I'm doing right now. But so I did that for a while, and through serendipity, I discovered this technique that I have and that I've developed over the last 12 years. And basically, it allows me to be creative in a way that's different from painting landscapes. It allows me to experiment, which I like to do. I've got a science background, so what I do is experiment with brush stroke and light and how light affects the brush stroke, and with color. And as Sarah pointed out, or Lisa, I do use monochromatic pigments, meaning that basically what you see is one color that I'm using, and it's how I manipulate the paint as I'm making the painting that gives it the illusion of 3 dimensions. If you go up to the painting, it's flat. I'm not really carving anything out of anything. I'm just using brush stroke and how the light affects it. And my interest is in waves, because there are waves throughout nature, from subatomic particles to what you see in the ocean. Light, part of it, which is waves. There are rapid waves now, so everything is enmeshed in waves, and that's kind of my interest there. And so that's what I like to experiment with, and waves and patterns and flow and things that give an organic feel. That's what I'm interested in experimenting with and trying to convey. But the bottom line in what I'm trying to do is I try to impress myself with what I'm doing. I want to amaze myself to see how much I can push what it is that I'm doing. And that's what's resulted in paintings like these. So that's my story.
Thank
I
you.
hope you can hear. I wasn't
Thank both of you, and Helen, I'd love for you to address this too. You both talk about kind of your evolution in your work. And Danny, you going from realistic landscapes to defining your own technique through things that hadn't been tried before. And Helen, we've seen this in your work as well, but can you talk for a little bit about the progression of your work and where you are now, and the conversation you and I had earlier? What I love about the two of you together, and Danny, I'm gonna ask you this question later too. I said to Helen, are you seeing anything in here and in your life now that you're seeing all of this together? And everybody all evening has been talking about the pairing in the back of the room. The two, Cerulean is the blue painting, and Atoll 3 is Helen's piece that's in front of it. And so Helen mentioned to me, seeing that the way it is together, that it made her mind go to a different place with some of these circular shapes that she's working with. So talk about your evolution and process and where your mind is going now.
Yes. When making glass, it's a fairly technical process. So, you know, you always start out making where you get your glass sheet, you cut it, you layer it together. So you may layer it like a cheese sandwich, layers on top of one another. Or a lot of these pieces with the stripes on, they're strips of glass where I put them on their edge like a domino and then fuse them together. But you always start out by putting those pieces in the kiln, fusing it and taking it to close to a liquid point, so you get a solid piece of glass. So then after that, it comes down to a process of, do I want to keep it flat and shiny? Do I want to do a reductive process and take the shininess off? And, you know, by sandblasting it, I can get it back to the matte. But what often happens is it's during that process of, I may end up with a piece that I think it needs a little bit more work. So then I'll go and put it on the tile saw, and I'll completely dice the piece up into other pieces, and then I will turn them on their side, refuse them together, and I end up with another piece. So a lot of it is an experimentation as I go along as the piece speaks to me. But again, the process of firing a piece of glass is fraught, and we say, oh, what the kiln god's going to do today to me. You know, are they going to be happy last night, and I'll end up with a piece how I expected it or not? But quite often what happens is that piece will evolve as we go along. And particularly with the atoll at the back there, I've been looking at that and I see it against Danny's beautiful blue piece. And now I'm thinking to myself, well, I want to start making these into almost spiky pieces where I've got the texture, but I want some of my arms to come out a little longer on it. And then I want them onto wall pieces so that my spiky sort of long arms that come out will start to meet another spiky one off another round circle. So I'm thinking, oh, because yeah, I think these will look pretty cool and it'll be fun to do. And then I'll try and replicate these pieces to see how large I can go. Because in my kiln, I can make about 29-inch diameter circle, my largest kiln. So I think, oh, these will be pretty cool. So it's these ideas that sort of ruminate overnight, and quite often over months, that will be sitting there in my head as I start to develop the process. And it's a whole process of sort of trial and error as I start to move and get those pieces larger and larger, or will that pattern enable me to go larger? Because sometimes I've made patterns that are really cool when it's only 10 inches big, and then all of a sudden I go to 18, 20, and the whole thing is lost. So it's a process of just pushing and pushing and pushing to see where the glass will allow it to go before it loses its complexity or its beauty that I was thinking I was going to achieve. So it's just playing with heat and time and scale to sort of develop that piece to where I think it can go.
I'm curious, we talked the podcast, yes, we do have a podcast. If anybody wants to tune in, you can go to our website and listen. But we talked in our podcast about the things that inspire your artwork, and travel is that the weave that kind of connects both of you guys. In fact, Helen is leaving after this show to go to Everest to take a group of women to base camp, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, wow. So she'll be doing that. And so I wanted to talk to you guys about the inspiration that you get when you're traveling and how you take those inspirations and bring it home.
All right, I'm going to hold the whole floor for a little bit longer, Danny. Sorry.
That's all right. I'm waiting for inspiration.
Precious. So yeah, over the years, I've done a lot of guiding for adventure travel companies, and likewise, we're saying in April 1, I'm actually taking 8 ladies to the base camp of Everest for a 18-day trek. But when I was cycling across Tanzania or other places, quite often certain things will again resonate with you as you're cycling, and particularly cycling and hiking. I think it gives you an awful lot of time to just get into your own little zone. You leave you don't have your cell phone, you don't have your iPads, you're either cycling or you're walking, and you're just there in the moment. So it allows you to look around and think more about what's going on, and what you like and what you see. So a number of my pieces, there are 2 pieces here that came out of treks and trips in Tanzania. And the black and white one in the middle there, just right here on the pedestal with the scoopy shape, we call that Umzungu. I call it Umzungu, which means crazy white person in Swahili. And when I was guiding treks in Tanzania, the local guides used to call me Princess Umzungu, crazy white princess. But what happened was that the Maasai when they sleep, they have these little wooden blocks that are curved, and it sits in the crook of their neck. So when they're sleeping, it's like a little wooden pillow. So I started making these particular pattern bars with my black glasses and my amber glasses, and then I'd slice them up. But I really liked that shape, so then I made a mold so that it would replicate that shape. So that's why I came out with a series of these sort of decorative pieces, which I call Umzungu. I have Umzungu Safari and different sort of color schemes going. And then also this one over here, I call the warrior because it reminds me of the Maasai. Not particularly the little bit of the colors, but again, with the big plates that they wear around their heads, and they have the earrings in. So again, these sort of ideas from my treks have sort of slowly crept in. They don't dominate. They sort of ruminate for a while. I'll come out with a piece, and that became the warrior. Over the years, I've guided treks in Bhutan. And again, when you go into Bhutan and Nepal, the doorways are highly decorative. So again, with lots of photographs, a lot of my work is repetition of color and pattern. And so a lot of my pieces, again, have that repetition of pattern. If I'm going to make it like a cheese sandwich, I like the repetition because it often picks up the symmetry of the doorways that I've seen along my trips. So again, I think Danny keeps a sketchbook. It's all on camera. Back in the day, it was slide film, but I got all of those, and I'll look at tiles when I went across, it was Oman, wasn't it? When we were in Oman, when you look at the tiles in the halls and the archways and everything, it's all repetition of patterns. So I look at those patterns to then see how I can take that pattern and replicate it into glass, and does it work? I did a body of work called The Log Cabin based on the quilt. And I make these big wall panels based on the log cabin, and sort of an abstract interpretation of that quilt pattern, which just fascinates me. So again, it's these ideas sort of stick there when you see something and you jot it down, and it goes in a little book, such and such, and then it slowly develops over time. That was a lot of words. I'll be running out in about 20 minutes.
When Helen is alluding to travel, I've spent some time traveling too, which has been, again, I'm grateful for, because when you travel, which probably many of you have experienced, it opens you up to new experiences, new ways of doing things, new ways of seeing, new perspectives. And when I travel, I do carry a sketchbook, as Helen alludes to. And I see things that gives me ideas. And for example, a lot of my ideas come from observations I have in nature. For example, cloud formations, or the way the top of a body of water is hit by the wind, or whether you have migratory birds, the patterns that they make as they float through the air, or if you're looking at a school of fish and they're swimming in a formation or even a ball to elude a predator. And all those things kind of gives me ideas. And she talks about patterns, and patterns are an integral part of what my paintings are as well. And I enjoy making patterns, and and having the degree of repetition. So all these things kind of give me ideas on what to do and what to explore. Again, when I make a painting, it's all an exercise in exploration. A lot of times I will start out with a concept of what I want to do, maybe even a sketch of what I want to do, but what I usually tell my wife is a lot of times the painting, once I start, it kind of starts to paint itself. And I just kind of follow along with the way it's generating its image. And a lot of times I start out with a painting that ends up differently than what my original concept was. So it has a fluidity to it, as well as a depth of creativity to it, that it kind of helps guide me as I see what's evolving with the painting as it is as I'm working on it. So that's kind of how my travels have influenced me. But I think that the better part of the travels, it just gives you a different perspective on life. And I try to incorporate everything from my science background to my love of art to my observations to relationships to everything. It's all in my paintings, as is everything else I do in my life. I look at it with a certain view. I mean, I cook, and when I cook, I put as much care and emphasis in what I'm doing as I do my paintings, or if I'm taking care of a patient, or doing something else many interests that I have. So it's just an integral part of who I am, and comes out, at least in this format, in this way.
Thank you. Hang on to that, because I've got a follow-up.
Okay.
If you would.
Sure.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
There we go. We often get the question, and I would pose this to both of you. People are fascinated by how long it takes you to create a piece, and if you are working on pieces simultaneously, or if you are all in on one before you move to the next. So I would ask Danny that of you first. Is one of these pieces in this room? Let's use Dissonant Echo, the red one over here, as an example. How long does a piece like that take you?
That's a complicated answer. First of all, because if I was really to get in depth about it, then I would really reveal my trade secret, which I don't want. I use oil paint, so oil paint takes a while to dry. And that's just to get a crust on the outer surface. to get solidified or oxidized, to get hard like plastic. It's not plastic. But to get to that point, it can take several months, 6 months to cure is what they call it. So that in itself lends a strong restriction on how long it takes me to generate a painting. My standard answer is probably about 3 months, because I do the painting in stages, and each stage has to dry again with respect to the oil paint, and then I do another stage, and then another stage before I have the final image. So it takes a while. It's not something that's done overnight.
And over,
This is mostly for Sue, because I know there's just not a big enough crowd that I need to yell at you. Over the course of those 3 months, are you working on others at the same time? Do you
I
have
can.
multiples on the easel at once?
I can, actually, I paint out of our apartment, and we have a room that we designate the creative room. And that's where I do my painting. And if I had a studio this size, I could work on several simultaneously, because again, I have to wait for one stage of the painting to dry before I proceed with the next. So I could be working with one here and one here and one there and there. But I don't have that space, so I kind of do them one at a time.
thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Charlie, what about you? When you, are you working, I know that you are working on pieces simultaneously, but you are driven just as Danny's driven by the constraints of oil, you're driven by the constraints of your kiln, both size and time and how much you're loading. So are you working on multiple ideas simultaneously?
I don't necessarily work on multiple ideas simultaneously, mainly because I work full-time at this. So I have orders come in and pieces go out to fulfill the orders. And I have sort of a level of bread and butter work, which is a lot of pieces which just sell, sell, and sell. So I make those, and then when I have the luxury of more time, then I start the experimentation work. So what typically happens is I keep working some pieces, which I can, some of the functional pieces, for example, I can put in the kiln, they're in a kiln for 36 hours, 2 days later, sort of thing, they come out the kiln, I package them up and they go out. But then if I'm working on my bigger, more complex pieces, I can be working on those for quite a lengthy period of time, mainly because, again, I have my bread and butter that still needs to go out to pay the rent for my workshop. And then I can work on these. But again, those pieces will, it takes an awful lot of time just to cut the glass. And glass doesn't always want to cut in the line I want it to cut. So you go through an awful lot of glass, you order more glass, and then you start layering out the pieces. So some pieces can take me a week of cutting glass to get enough glass amassed to make it. And then a job comes in, I work on the job, and then I'll pull the glass back out and start working on those experimental pieces. So once those pieces are sort of put together, some pieces are in the kiln for 48 hours or longer. I have some pieces that have to anneal for a week. So it'll sit in the kiln for a week because when you take glass up to liquid and then cool it down, you want to calm it back down. It needs to go back into its meditative state, which is around 900 degrees. So on my thick pieces, I do some that are cast 2-inch thick pieces. They're in the kiln for about a week, just calming the inner core down so that it doesn't crack later on. So again, that dictates when I can get that in the kiln, because I have 3 kilns. So do I need that kiln for other work or not? So it all depends on that firing process and how that also impacts the rest of my sort of work that I have to do. But I think Danny, with Danny, and he's got various stages. With my glass, it can sit there on the workbench. I've got 6 workbenches. I have a 1,000 square foot workshop. So I can put my glass to one side of the workbench and work on other pieces. But also it allows my head time to catch up with the idea. So I may have the idea, but it will take an awful lot longer to try and figure out the process to get the piece to where I want to get it. And that's where it takes, that takes the time. So for example, with the drop vessels, when I want to actually make the shape of the vessel, that piece will end up, at one point, it takes 5 hours for that drop to happen. So every 15 minutes, I have a timer set. So every 15 minutes at a certain temperature, I then start peeking in the kiln to see how much that glass has moved and it's starting to drop. So, oh, it's just, I hold it for 2 hours at 1100 degrees just to let the glass soak so that it doesn't crack. So all of the glass equalizes out. So then once it gets to 1125, I start timing it. So over 5 hours, I got that timer going every 15 minutes to see what it's doing. Because as it starts to drop, the sides and the colors all react differently to heat. So one color will move quicker than the other. So I've ended up with a number of elephant's feet, where it is all of a sudden it's gone within, and at the end of it, I'll say, all right, I'm going to hold it for 3 minutes. Just 3 minutes, because it's getting close to, I don't want it to touch the bottom of the kiln because I don't want a flat bottom. So I just want it to round out. 3 minutes later, I got an elephant's foot. That piece ends up in the bin because it's been worked so long and I can't salvage it. So again, you know, I've got 3 days worth of cutting of glass. It's been in the kiln for 2 days just to make the slab. So again, the process can be very lengthy. And, you know, for every 2 to 3 balls that I make, only one will end up being viable to actually show to the world.
Wow. That's expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, well, you know, for those of you who are part of the Women's Art Circle, we're going to see this all be done. So it's going to be really cool. Bobby, you can join us. Yes. So yes, it's going to be so fascinating. We were supposed to do this week, and the weather, we pushed it away, which was a good decision. But we'll be doing that on March 16th. So I want to pose to see if anybody in the audience has any questions for our guests. Because I know that you probably want more time to stare at this beautiful artwork and see if you want to buy it. Lisa.
For Danny, I'm a graphic designer and both of you fascinate me. Like to get that depth, the 3D depth, you've got to plan that out. Like I feel like as a graphic designer, I have to plan out everything before I actually attack it. Do you, like you said, it just kind of forms, but to get those layers of 3D and the right brush, I'm assuming, you know, you perfected the brush strokes. Do you have to plan that out in some respect, like in a sketch, or how do you do that?
Well, yeah, and what I do is I do different series of paintings. So I will paint, you know, 5, 6 paintings that look similar. And so I can kind of experiment within that series of what I want it to look like. And like I said earlier, I do start out with an idea. And I experiment kind of along the way. And part of that is a learning process in which I learn how to position the brush strokes to get the 3D effect with how the light's going to affect it.
Do you work on chunks, or do you work as a whole?
As a whole. Yeah, it's taken me a while to figure out. You know, initially I was making black paintings because the effects I could only achieve with black paint. And but at that point I was kind of learning how to manipulate the brush strokes with regard to how the light was hitting the brush strokes with simply black paint. And I was able to develop then at that point other techniques that allowed me to introduce color. And my initial colors were like phthalo blues, because that color in itself has intrinsic properties of reflectivity. And from there, I experimented with other processes and was pretty much able to generate any of the colors. Some of the colors that I have to use to get the effect because the paint comes out of the tube, will not do that. So sometimes I have to add medium so that I can actually get a flow, and you'll see that there's a difference in what Helen's talking about, her sandblown glass versus non-sandblown glass. There's a difference in the texture, matte versus glossy. Well, it's the same with my paintings. I have matte paintings like that, and I have kind of shiny paintings like the gold there. And the reason it's shiny is to get that effect and the fluidity with the paint. I've put medium into the mix so that I'm able to spread it easily and also get a three-dimensional effect. That's not the same as this kind of three-dimensional effect, because this is just pure paint right out of the tube. You know, I may alter the hue by adding white or so, but that's the way it comes out. And that's kind of what I do. So now, instead of only being able to produce black paintings that look dimensional, I'm able to produce any color that I want. But I have a tendency to produce blues because blues is my favorite color.
Does anyone else have any other questions? So I want to thank Danny and Helen because we had the pleasure of doing our podcast. So this was so fascinating for us to learn so much about your techniques and your path to becoming these incredible artists. You know, I'm disappointed that the weather was so bad tonight because I really, really think that this is truly one of our most beautiful shows. So I am hoping that all of you go out there and tell your friends. This goes on till March 26th. So we would love to have people come and visit. We will also available to set up private tours. So if there's anybody interested in that, we can do that as well. But take your time, look at these beautiful paintings. We have stuff in the gift shop from both of them that are a lower price point, but still just as beautiful. So please take your time looking out there. And thank you so much for giving us your time tonight. Hopefully you enjoyed the show as much as we did.